This is Living Wisely, Living Well, this book by Swami Kriyanandaji, with a saying every day of the year for April 18. Swamiji writes, "Speak kindly to animals. As human beings are helped upward in their evolution by keeping saintly company, so animal evolution is hastened by association with human beings. You yourself will be helped also if you extend a helping hand to creatures lower than yourself on the evolutionary scale." This is a very interesting concept, and I think new to some people, that animals' evolution can be hastened by how we work with them, how we love them, how we relate to them. And also our own evolution is hastened when we do it in the right way. So this is what Swamiji is talking about. I'm going to talk first just about the consciousness of animals, because people don't often understand how aware they are, how conscious they are. In the Hindu scriptures, Yoganandaji quotes from somewhere. He says, "God sleeps in the rocks, dreams in the plants, stirs towards wakefulness in the animals, and in mankind awakens to self-awareness." And so animals are evolving just like we are. We were animals at one time. We evolved from that state. And in some way, all creatures, including all of us, have a duty to lift up those who are lower than us in terms of either spiritual evolution or even just in certain qualities. When humans who maybe have a lesson to learn that we learned long ago, we have a duty to share that with them. This is Divine Mother, all of her children, we're all helping each other, bringing each other towards freedom. And so if you have a trait, a quality, a good karma, share it with others, or at least teach others how to develop that trait in themselves, because we're not wanting to just give away everything that we have. Far better is to teach others and train others in how to develop that quality. There's an expression that if you want someone to be able to eat fish, you can either give them fish or you can teach them how to catch fish. And far better to teach them how to catch fish and be able to sustain themselves. And so with animals, we're trying to uplift them. Don't take for granted how aware and conscious animals are. There's just some amazing stories of animals, and I've had some very interesting experiences in my own life. There is a psychic, an animal psychic, that my brother met her, and she told some really amazing stories of how conscious animals are. And these animal psychics, there are many of them, and what this one teaches is that animals work with imagery and images in the mind. Yes, speak kindly to animals, but it's more the vibration that they're experiencing. And I've had a practice. I walk down the streets here where we live in Pune, and there are dogs everywhere, as they are commonly in India. And there are these packs that are very friendly, and they're just part of the neighborhood. They're there every day for the last couple of years. And I always speak to them. I say hello. I just whisper to them. But because these are dogs raised in a Hindi-speaking country, I don't know that they understand my English. But in fact, I don't know that dogs really understand language except the language of the heart. And especially, they do feel and experience deep feeling and imagery and emotion. And this animal psychic that my brother met, and some people that my brother knew brought their animals, and he heard the story from the psychic and from the people who brought the animals. And I'll tell you two stories. One of them, there was a dog that was suddenly not doing well. It was sick, it was unwell, and this was a dog that lived at the ashram. And so they brought the dog to the animal psychic. And the animal psychic, she tuned into this dog and asked the dog, "What's the problem? What's bothering you? Why are you unhappy? Why are you sick?" And the dog told her. The dog told her that where it was sleeping, there was this loud noise that came on every night. And this was a new thing that was happening. And before, it used to be able to sleep at night really well, and then continually there was this loud noise. And she asked the owners, "Well, what's happening? What changed?" And it turns out that the dog slept outside next to a large refrigerator, and it got a new motor, this refrigerator did, or maybe the old one was failing, and it was making a lot of noise when it would turn on in the middle of the night, and it was disturbing the dog's sleep. And so they got a new motor for the refrigerator, and the dog was happy. The other story, which is really amazing, and this shows how conscious animals can be. It was a story of a horse owner, told by my brother again. And this horse was also ailing, unhappy. It wasn't eating. It was just, it lost its zest for life, and it wasn't that old. So they brought the horse to this animal psychic. And this animal psychic tuned into the horse. And as she was with the horse, she was also talking to the owner, and she was conveying what the horse wanted to the owner because she could understand the horse. And she said to the owner, "Your horse is in a field, right? A large field." And the owner said yes. And there's a fence, and on the other side of the fence, there's another horse, right? And the owner said yes. And the owner was surprised at how much detail there was. And then the psychic said, "And your horse is very good friends with this other horse. Is that true?" The owner said, "Yes, that's true." And then here's the amazing part, which shows how conscious animals are. And she said to the owner, "This other horse, the owner of that horse takes that horse running on the beach at the ocean. And that horse loves running on the beach. And when it comes back to the field, it's telling your horse about how wonderful it is to run on the beach and how much that your horse would love to run on the beach. And your horse is really, really sad because it cannot run on the beach." And the owner was so surprised. And the owner went, talked to the owner of the other horse, and found out that indeed this other horse was regularly running on the beach. And so she started taking her horse running on the beach. And this horse started living life, eating food again, and became very happy. So this is how conscious animals are. And I'll tell one more story because this is a very strange story. There was a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. Her name was Kamala Selva. Very, very delightful soul, one of the most delightful people you would ever meet. And she recommended in a book that she wrote, a few books that she really highly recommended and wanted people to read. And one of them was a book about animals. It was called Kinship with All Life. And it was about a man who developed relationships, friendships with animals, where they did the most uncanny things. And one of the things that he did is that one day, I forget how it happened, but he developed a friendship with a fly, believe it or not, a fly. And in fact, he named the fly. He called it Freddie the Fly. And this fly would come to him when he called it. When he came out in the morning, the fly would come to him and he would feed the fly. He would talk to the fly. This is what he said about this Freddie the Fly. "Before Freddie the Fly came to live with me," and that's how he described this fly came to live with him, "my decreeing about flies had been supplying me with a continuous harvest of disagreeable and troublesome results. I expected flies to be unfriendly, and they were. I expected them to annoy me, and they did. I expected them to bite me, and they accommodated me in that manner too. With the accuracy and precision of an echo, I had been getting back in outward experience just what I had been mentally and vocally decreeing and expecting. Freddie was nothing more or less than the state of my own consciousness about him being made manifest in an outward experience." And so, don't ever take for granted the consciousness of all creatures, flies, insects, snakes, everything. I grew up in an area that there was this vast forest or jungle behind my house throughout my childhood. And so I spent a good part of my childhood running through the forest, swimming in the creek, befriending fish and animals and all these creatures. And so I really understand this connection that we have with all of creation. And with animals, it's not just that we have a duty for lifting them up. In fact, it's a very strange thing, but Lahiri Mahashai, one of his disciples, said that Lahiri Mahashai, before he passed away and left the body, he was working out a way to try to liberate animals from the animal state to complete final liberation. Isn't that strange? what I find strange is that he would even be interested in doing such a thing. And so you see that great masters and great saints, they have this understanding that we have a duty to lift everything up. It's just part of the responsibility that God has given us. On a highest level, Yoganandaji once said that in order to become fully liberated, we must help free 6 other souls. And this is a cosmic law. It's not just the final exam to become liberated. Every step of the way, we have a duty to lift others up. And when we do, we lift ourselves up also through being an instrument for that love of the divine. And I think also just fulfilling Divine Mother's desire that her children help each other in any way that we can, even the lowliest creature. You will find that if you make this a practice, that giving love, kindness to all creatures, also to people who are maybe lower evolutionary than us, that it does create waves or ripples of positive energy going out into the world. And it really, it's like a pebble or a stone thrown in a lake. Those ripples spread, and they spread outward, and they touch others, and it's like a chain reaction going out. There's a movie I once saw, and it's an American movie with the actor Danny Kaye. It was one of Swami Kriyananda's movies that he enjoyed. And in this movie, the character Danny Kaye, he's a lowly person working, I think, in some office. And he goes to the office, and the chief of the office abuses one of his underlings. And so as the underling comes out the door, he abuses someone else out of anger, this chain reaction. That underling abuses Danny Kaye, hits him, yells at him, and this anger is starting to spread. And the humor in it is Danny Kaye is the lowest of the low, and he looks around for somebody to abuse because this is the chain reaction that's happening. And he finally sees a dog, and he goes and kicks the dog and doesn't harm it, but it just is a demonstration and a very good visual representation of how the energy we put out spreads and touches others, touches animals, touches all of creation. And so this is a good reason for consciously putting out energy all the time, not just being passive and being withdrawn all the time, although we have to withdraw into ourselves in meditation and at other times. But when we're out in the world and we're around animals, we're around people, try to act consciously as an instrument for good, for love, for kindness. And this is what happens, is that, number one, it spreads and touches others. It spreads through the neighborhood and spreads all over. And this is great saints. You especially see this, that their energy and their actions, because they have so much divine power, touch their disciples, and their disciples touch others. And it really, really spreads far and wide. But we all have the power to be able to do this. And so when especially you're relating to people, creatures who are below us in certain ways, I think we can all learn from each other. Be very conscious of giving kind energy. You will find that it's a good way to understand people and where they are at is how they treat those who are underneath them. I read some advice. It was advice on how to choose a prospective partner in life. And it said that one of the ways you can test is if you're going out to a restaurant, see how they treat the waiter and the dishwasher and others they interact with. If they're mean and rude with them, then go find somebody else. But if they're kind and loving to everybody in that situation, you'll see that this is usually a good-hearted person. So this is the advice that Swami Kriyananda gives, is to speak kindly to animals, consciously give them positive energy. And if you give kindness and energy to all of creation in that way, you will find that you are the one who has changed the most, because you start becoming an instrument in a very active way of divine blessings to others. Now there's a story, I'll tell one story about my own self, because I have found that creatures respond to love. And I think I've always loved birds, and I feed birds, and I think that when you give to creatures that way, it's almost like I think the word spreads through the animal kingdom, and they tell other birds on some vibrational level. There's a story that we all know, an autobiography of a yogi. It's the Tiger Swami, and his real claim to fame was that he would fight and wrestle tigers, the worst, biggest, deadliest tigers, and he would wrestle and fight them and punch them and sometimes kill them, and he would do this just for show. And one day, finally, it so happened that the word spread, he found out later, through the tiger kingdom, that he was taking advantage of these tigers just to show his fame and his power and earn money and all this. And this tiger, this really fierce tiger, came and almost killed him and humbled him in a way. And this fierce tiger was sent by the other tigers. And it goes the other way too, is that when you give kindness to animals, the word goes out in a way. And again, I think it's on a vibrational level. But because I've always had this fondness for birds, even raising some injured birds when I was just a small boy, I was out camping one time. And the strangest thing happened. I've just never heard of anything like this. But I think it was partly in response to how I've given to that particular creature in my life. And I still enjoy feeding birds. And a few times now I've had wild birds land on me, not in a zoo or in any situation or even where I was feeding them. In this case it was extreme. I was camping. I was lying in my sleeping bag one very, very cold morning. I didn't have a tent. I was high up in the mountains in a very remote, very wild place. No people around. And it was a very cold night, so I had the sleeping bag pulled up over my head. And the only thing poking out of the sleeping bag was my very wild and very long hair. This is many, many years ago when I was very young. And as I woke up in the morning, it was too cold to poke my head out, but I could feel something pulling on my hair, just playing and tugging and doing something with my hair. And it was so strange because I was in a place where there was no people. I hadn't seen a person for days. That was how remote and wild this place was. But something or someone was tugging on my hair gently. And I just was very delighted. And I thought, who could this be? Is these devas playing with my hair? Or is this some animal that's playing with me? I don't think it's a person, but as I poked my head out of the sleeping bag, I felt and saw and heard these two tiny, tiny little birds, about this big, were inside. They weren't on my hair. They were inside and all tangled up in my hair and chirping and playing and having fun. And eventually they flew away. And so this, when we give love to all of creation, creation gives love back to us. And so this is the cycle of life. And I think, again, this is what Divine Mother, she wants all of her children to be doing this in one way or another. And so if you think always of giving, rather than thinking, okay, there's an animal, Swami Kriyananda said to speak kindly, think in terms only just of giving in all situations, to all souls, even if it's just a very kindly smile to a beggar, if you don't feel inspired or the right thing to give them money, but just try to find a way to send prayers and energy to others. For the April 20 reading, Swamiji gives another reading along the same lines, even though it doesn't seem like it. But what he says is, in any magnetic interchange, what you give out to others will affect what you receive from them. To ensure the greatest protection from all harmful influences, try to act as a channel of divine blessings to all. And so Swamiji is saying, not just with animals, but with all of creation, especially with other people, he's saying consciously, proactively act as a channel for divine blessings, rather than just being passive or spacing out or asking the question of how do I protect myself. When we consciously send blessings out to others, this is actually how we protect ourselves from harmful influences. It happens very often that I hear people who work in the corporate world, who are yogis, they have a difficulty sometimes where they meditate in the morning, they get very calm, their hearts are open, they get more sensitive. Then they go into work And it's difficult for them. People in work are restless, or maybe they're angry, or they gossip and say negative things. And it's very disturbing for people. And the way out, rather than trying to protect the gains you've had from meditation and sort of wrap a barbed wire fence around your heart, the answer is, as Swamiji says here, is to consciously send divine blessings to all and act as a channel for those divine blessings. Try this if you're in such a situation. When you go to work, do this for a week, just as an experiment. This week, I'm going to go to work every day, and I'm just going to look around, and as I go throughout the day, I'm going to pray for everyone in my office, especially for those who are negative or who rub me the wrong way, or maybe those who don't like me. And I'm going to pray for them, and I'm going to send Divine Mother or Yoganandaji's healing blessings and act as an instrument, sending it to those people. And you don't have to do anything else. You can smile at them or pretend that you're not doing this. But just do this as an experiment and see what happens. And I've heard so many amazing stories about this. I've heard of people who have turned enemies into great friends by changing them through divine blessings and healing prayers. I've heard of people calming down the energy of an office. Don't you see this? That there's sometimes a certain person who's so positive, kind, and calm that other people, normally negative people, when they're around that person, they start behaving much better, much more positively. They start less misbehaving and cursing and all these things. And this is just from vibration and magnetism. And so we can affect, change the magnetism, vibration, consciousness in an environment. And the way to do it is to be very much more conscious about sending out energy and blessing to others. So do this as an experiment. It can be with your family. If you don't work in a corporate office, do this with your family. And you'll find that great saints and masters, the people around them tend to become the highest versions of themselves. We saw this with Swami Kriyananda when we were around him. It was interesting being around him because someone expressed this very well. What they noticed when they were in the presence of Swami Kriyananda was not who he was and how great he was. People were aware of that spiritually. What they noticed was how they changed inside. They became the highest version of themselves. They became calmer, kinder. So they noticed how Swami Kriyananda changed them, just being in his presence. And you may say, well, I'm not a Swami Kriyananda, I'm not a saint. But really all he was doing was just over the decades, over the years, it just became natural for him to be a channel for divine blessings to all. And so make this a practice. Don't be passive when you're in negative situations. Send out energy and blessings. If someone is very evil, Swami Kriyananda has said, don't pray for an evil person. I made this mistake one time. I recommended or suggested this idea of praying for an especially evil person who, on the world stage, not someone who I knew personally. And somebody said, no, that's not the appropriate thing to do. It's not helpful at all. And so in those situations, you can take God's name if someone is really negative and ask God to bless you. And Yogananda said also that you can take your thumb and make a blue cross between you and that person, either physically or just mentally do that, because you don't want to go around going like this to everybody and freaking them out and making them even more angry, I guess. So there are ways that we can work with this. But the best way of all, you will see, is that those who consciously act as a channel for divine blessings to others, they do start to change others around them. And it's not just saints or masters who can do it. It's all of us who can do this. I've seen this. I've seen very new people on the spiritual path who have learned this practice and who have started doing it, and they have started changing others around them. And started, like I said, turning enemies into friends. And you can also do this when you're at home. At the end of your meditation, it's a really, really good practice to practice Yoganandaji's healing prayers. People often ask, what do I do during that time after I do the techniques? of meditation. I'm sitting there where, Yogananda recommended having about 15 minutes after practicing Kriya Yoga, where you're not doing more techniques and practicing just direct inner communion with God as divine bliss or divine love or some form of God or the Guru. And sometimes the mind gets restless after a while of doing that. I would highly recommend then when the mind gets a little restless and it needs to get engaged in something, rather than going back to techniques, start to practice healing prayers for others. And do a lot of these if you want to. Spend 10, 15 minutes doing this. At one time, I had the practice of taking my Kriya Mala. It has 108 beads. And I would pray for 108 people. And I would go through the Mala, and I would take one person at a time. I would visualize that person, send healing energy, ask Divine Mother, the Guru, to bless them. I would go on to the next bead. And I would do 108 people. And it took a long time to do that. But it's very uplifting. Experiment with this. Try to see this whole of the spiritual life as a grand experiment. And it really can be fun, it can be interesting, it can be fascinating, just like this guy who was experimenting with communicating with animals and learned how to talk and communicate both ways with a fly, of all things. This is the adventure of life. And this is what we should do with our spiritual practices. And just take these things and apply them in daily life. These are not just good ideas. These are not just theories. These are real practices that we should creatively think of how to apply in our meditation, in our daily life. Yogananda, he talked about this. He said, every day, do something you've never done before. And that's so interesting because he was so keen on people being very creative with their lives and doing new things all the time. And it's so easy to get into a rut of just going to work and doing the same thing. And even in our meditation, it's very easy to get into a pattern where things become mechanical and we lose the inspiration. And the way out of that is to be very creative with it, put creative energy into doing the same thing in new ways or doing brand new things with your sadhana, with your outward life, again, with animals, with people. So try these things. And I'll review a few things that you can work with. One is the very core thing that we're talking about tonight, speaking kindly to animals. When you walk down the street, make it a practice with birds, with dogs, with cats, to send them positive energy. And you'll see, even if you don't start to notice changes in them and their attraction to you, you'll see that it does change your heart. Second thing, in your environment, whether it's work or family, where you tend to be around a lot of people on a daily basis, consciously, when you enter into that situation for the first time, whether it's entering the room with family members or entering your office, that first step in there, consciously try to mentally, spiritually send healing blessings to everyone, acting as an instrument for divine love, divine joy, divine bliss. And then finally, in your own sadhana and meditation, work more consciously with sending healing prayers to those who especially you may have difficulties with, family members. Try to end every meditation with tuning into 5, 10 different people and consciously sending healing prayers to those individuals. You'll find that if you do these things, you start to change your relationships with animals, with the people that you're around, with all souls. Because in the end, the instrument is mostly changed by that which flows through it. And when we act as an instrument for divine blessings, regularly, consciously, and proactively, you find that the biggest change is in our own hearts. So may the great blessings of the Masters flow through us and touch all creatures and all people. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.